Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time zone you're in. Welcome to this episode of What's Up with Power. We're happy to have you here. We've got a great group joining us here in Zwift. Got a group ride that'll be rolling in just under 1 minute, and we are happy to bring you this presentation where Training Peaks works with us, as well as we've got a guest presenter today, Mr. Taylor Thomas from Thomas Endurance Coaching, and I will go ahead and bring you on the screen once we get the group ride rolling. So today's topic is going to be about using power for optimal workouts. Got great content. Taylor's been summarizing for us from the Training and Racing with the Power Meter book. If you haven't gone out and gotten that book, I suggest you do it. It's a great resource for learning how to coach yourself, how to improve yourself to the next level, how to understand what all these topics are that we're talking about in more detail. So, group ride is about to begin here. I'm going to bring Taylor on the screen. Taylor, how you going? How's it doing?
Good. How are you guys doing?
That was kind of awkward. How's it going? Yeah, I totally stumbled on that one. But anyway, we got the group ride is rolling now. We've got rain on the pier in Watopia. So rather than let the raindrops burden your conversation here, I'm going to hop off the screen and let you go to it. So I'm on the opening slide. Just let me know when you want to advance.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Justin. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining me. It's Taylor Thomas with Thomas Endurance Coaching. And thanks to everyone for having me back again. So, yeah, today we're going to cover Chapter 5 of Hunter Allen and Dr. Andy Coggan's book, Training and Racing with a Power Meter. And that specifically is how to use your power meter to get the most out of your workout. So there's a few things that we want to consider or take into consideration when we're training with a power meter. So when and where to train. So when to apply power to the ride and what type of terrain we want to ride. The variability of the ride. So riding your bike is inherently variable, specifically when it comes to power and your output. So pay attention to that. How to approach power-based intervals. So how specifically to kind of go about crafting or building power-based intervals. And then workouts based on your power zones. So specifically what your power zones refer to from a physiological standpoint. When you train a specific zone, what is it that you're trying to elicit from a physiological response perspective? So next slide. So the training opportunities. So I'll start by saying that, I'm of the opinion that training with a power meter, any opportunity all the time is valuable. I think there's value specifically in being able to apply a number to a ride. So take that information and analyze it and understand how that impacts your fitness, your fatigue, your training stress. But that being said, there are a few places or a few opportunities where training with a power meter really shines. So everyone's here on Zwift, and most people nowadays are using smart trainers. So obviously, indoor training is really a prime spot to utilize training with power. Primarily because of the lack of variables, right? You get on your trainer, you don't have to worry about traffic lights, you don't have to worry about weather, you don't have to worry about stop signs or anything else that causes variability or unpredictability in your ride. So indoor training is a great place to use power, specifically for power-based workouts, interval sessions. So as you take it outside, there's a few places where power is great. Flat roads, time trials, hill climbs, these are all great places to use your power meter. Flat roads are fantastic for any sort of steady state workout. So if you just wanted to do an easy recovery ride, if you're looking for like a zone 2 endurance ride, if you're doing tempo workouts where you're staying in a particular zone, zone 3 or sub threshold for extended periods of time, flat roads are fantastic. Time trials. The great thing about using your power meter with time trials is being able to come up with a power strategy. So you can figure out what power it is that you are able to hold based on the duration or the length of that time trial, and you can stick to that power plan, and it keeps you from starting too fast, which is kind of the cardinal rule of time trials, is not to go out too fast. And so you can more appropriately pace your effort during a TT. Hill climbs, kind of similar to a time trial. It just helps you dose that effort. So if you have, say, a 10-minute climb, based on historical efforts and based on the power that you're able to put out, how you can attack that climb. So then specific intervals, again, building any sort of interval style workout with specific intensities and specific durations for those intervals. This is really the place where power shines, and probably the reason that most people are training with power, so that you can hone in and really drive down on what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So, again, whatever power zone you're trying to target, you can do that very specifically and very precisely with power. And then race-based intervals. So making sure that your efforts match the rigors of the racing that you're looking to do. So surges, lead outs, hill climbs, whatever that is, you can integrate that into your training. Next slide. So like I said, cycling is inherently variable. In training and racing with a power meter, it's referred to as the stochastic nature of cycling. So that's just a word that means random. And so because we know that it's random, and that randomness is gonna cause some variability in our power numbers, there's a few things we can keep in mind. Staying within a particular range, so not looking at your power reading or your power numbers second by second, but rather looking at it over a little bit longer period of time. A lot of times you can set up your computer to read 3-second average or normalized power, and so going out with a plan and staying within a power range for the majority of the ride, and not being too concerned if your power drifts above or below that predetermined range for a short period of time. Focus on pacing, so steady and consistent effort, making sure that if there's a surge in speed, then there's going to be a surge in effort. So making sure to keep things like cadence and speed in check, specifically if you're trying to stick to a precise power range, and then focusing on how you dose your effort as well. So when you start out, making sure that if the goal is to ride for 3 hours at a standardized pace or within a particular range, that you don't start out much too high and then taper off towards the end. So just appropriate pacing throughout the ride. Matching the effort with the terrain. So if you are going to do, like I said, so flat roads are great for steady state workouts. If that's the workout that you want to do, make sure that you pick the terrain that best suits the workout that you're trying to accomplish. So if you're doing longer sustained efforts, then a flat road or flatter road is probably the best place to do that. If you're working on shorter, more intense intervals, then a hill climb is probably the best place to do that. So just thinking about how the terrain matches up with what you're trying to accomplish, and then understanding how that terrain impacts your workout. So again, if the goal is just an easy recovery ride, and you've picked a route that is constantly rolling hills, that really ends up being much more of a hill workout than it is a recovery ride. So just realizing that the terrain can really dramatically affect the type of effort that you're attempting to produce. Next slide. So now that we have that sorted out, we can move towards starting to build workouts, or starting to understand what it is we need to do to elicit certain responses in our body. So part of doing cycling and power-based workouts is interval training. So when do we do more intervals, right? So we want to do the right amount, and we want to do as many as we can to get the most gains or have the greatest opportunity for growth from a fitness perspective. The long and short of it is you should do more if you have more to give. So if you finish an interval workout, say you're doing 5-minute repeats, and when you finish the last 5-minute interval, you are producing the same power that you produced during the first few intervals, then you should do more intervals, right? We expect a certain amount of decline or a certain amount of percent loss in terms of power output. And as your power continues to stay consistent, that means that your body is not necessarily working outside of its comfort zone, and you're not necessarily pushing yourself as best you could. FTP accuracy. So I've talked about this before on What's Up with Power, but what I mean by this is the validity of the power data that you're using to establish your FTP is the most important thing when it comes to establishing or writing power-based workouts. So if your FTP is based on skewed or flawed data, whether it's power spikes or whether you haven't been training hard enough, and so your FTP is set too low, in return, your power zones are not going to be set appropriately. And then to that end, any of the power-based workouts that you write are not going to be, they're either going to be too hard or they're going to be too easy. But one way or the other, you're not going to be reaching your full potential when you execute those workouts. So making sure that your FTP is set correctly is really the linchpin of training with power. Time and intensity, understanding the relationship between those two, understanding that as duration extends, intensity can and should decrease to a certain extent. Understanding at what time period or what duration you're able to execute intervals above or below threshold, and when you do that, what specific area that targets. So knowing, understanding how that relationship works and how to apply that to the workouts that you're executing, and when to stop. So just as important as the fact that you can and should do as many intervals as possible, there is a point where you're getting diminishing returns, and so if you see the power drop too much, then you should stop. You're not getting the gains from those intervals. And there's a great chart in Training and Racing with a power meter that attempts to quantify the percent loss for particular durations, and it could be as little as 3 to 5% for an interval that's say 20 minutes long, and it could be as much of a decrease as of 15% for an interval that's 30 seconds long. So there's a lot of variables that go into how well an interval session is executed, but there is some standard kind of percent loss numbers that we can look at, and that can really help you craft your workouts, and then also know when to call it a day and go home when you've gotten the most out of your body. Next slide. So the workouts for power-based training. So in the book, Hunter and Dr. Cogging go through and outline every power zone and what workouts look like for each of those zones. I feel like most people have a pretty good handle on this concept, and certainly have a pretty good handle on power-based training zones. So I thought I'd cover some of the things that kind of stand out to me and that I think are really most important takeaways from that segment of the chapter. The first one is when and how to recover, and specifically the Zone 1 recovery ride. So recovery rides are often the most kind of overlooked and underappreciated ride for most cyclists that I talk to. And really, the truth of the matter is that it's because they're really painfully slow rides, right? They're way underneath your threshold. You're really just kind of easy spin pedaling along, but they're critical to proper recovery, to allowing your body to compensate for the hard efforts that you've produced, at earlier points within your training, and then also allowing yourself to kind of prepare for the training that's to come. Whether it's that week or later in the training block. So the zone one ride is really, really critical and should be an important part of your training. Building muscular endurance. So this refers to the zone two ride. Um, Similar to zone one, I see a lot of cyclists. These these rides tend to drift upwards and tend to turn into more tempo style efforts, especially if there's terrain involved. And the zone two ride is the foundation for most cycling disciplines. It builds a strong base early in the season. It's where your aerobic base comes from. It helps build stamina. It increases capitalization. It makes your heart stronger. So there's really great benefits to the kind of just the good old fashioned endurance ride and keeping everything below zone three. And so not even early in the season, but also during your warm up and your cool down. Also a good opportunity to build in the zone two ride. Sweet spot training. Most folks have heard about sweet spot training, but it really is a critical area, and I thought it was worth mentioning again. So the sweet spot is 88 to 94% of your established functional threshold power. Fantastic to build in earlier in the season as you build towards race season, specifically as you look towards integrating more FTP focused workouts, so intervals at your functional threshold power, and then they're also good again to rebuild as you move towards a second priority race. So oftentimes we'll see these sweet spot training sessions come back up again mid-season as we begin to rebuild after a taper and after some downtime from a priority race. So really the go-to kind of foundational effort for building a strong threshold and rebuilding as well. What are your goals? So I think it's important to always keep in mind what it is you're trying to accomplish with every workout. So if your goal is to build a stronger FTP, then realistically, every workout that you perform should be moving you in that direction. If your goal is to increase your VO2 max, then the workouts should be moving towards that direction. So it can be hard to, as you move through a season or a larger training block, it can be hard to not get pulled away or to get derailed by other workouts or workouts that seem interesting, especially as you start to pepper in races and group rides and other dynamics. But in the end, you want to make sure that every session to some capacity is moving you towards your goals and not to lose sight of that. And then mimicking race efforts. So I mentioned it a little earlier in the presentation, but at the end of the day, for most cyclists, the goal is to prepare for racing. And so if that's our goal, then we want to make sure to mimic those types of efforts in training, and we want to prepare our bodies for the rigors of race day. So if you're a crit racer and you need to be really good at lead outs and surges and holding zone 5, zone 6 power for 45 minutes to an hour, then you should train to be good at those things. You should include those types of efforts in your training. If you're a road racer and you race where there's big climbs, then work climbs at race pace effort into your training. So again, the idea is to keep your keep your eyes on the goal, and then to make sure that everything you're doing is moving you closer to those goals and getting you prepared for race day. Um, so that's the recap of chapter 5 of training and racing with power, and then I'll kick it back over to Justin, and we'll go to question and answer.
Very good. Thank you so much, Taylor. So I want everyone know that if you have questions, you can let them fly in the Facebook chat here, and we will discuss them, have Taylor answer them, and I think two really important takeaways here. All these topics I've gotten interesting. I want to reiterate about sweet spot training for those who are pressed for time, wanting to focus on what's going to get you your maximal increase in threshold power without putting undue strains on the body, something you can do over and over. Sweet spot's definitely one of those. Did a great job of covering that. The other interesting fact I wanted to cover, so you talked a little bit about what were the different uses for a power meter, right, Taylor? And one of those you talked about was pacing for hill climbs. Well, there's actually a little bit further you can go with that, in that let's say you're a member of a highly competitive social cycling website that has records for beating your friends on certain stretches of road. This is just a hypothetical situation that came to me last night. Just go with me on it, Taylor. And let's say you wanted to be faster than your buddy up this climb. Well, you can actually use your power meter in conjunction with, there's this great little website called bikecalculator.com. So if you've got a pretty steady grade uphill segment that's not wind exposed, or there's not much of a wind factor here, you can pretty much dial in how fast you're going to be up that climb based on how much power you put out. So you can plug in how much your weigh, what your bike is, and all that kind of stuff. So then you can basically just say, hey, in order to beat Johnny, Bob, or whoever your buddy's name is, I just need to hold these watts. And if you can look at your power profile and say, man, I can hold X amount of watts for that 3-minute long climb or 5-minute long climb, you just pace yourself and get it. Now, I know it's a hypothetical situation. I know not many of us here are competitive or would ever try to beat our friends. So I don't know if that applies to anyone. Just tuck it away, Taylor. You might like it one day.
Yeah, no, I'll chew on that. I mean, who knows? It could be something one day. You never know.
Very good. So Taylor, what kind of you do some racing yourself, right? Some events.
I do. Yeah. Yep.
What do you got coming up on the schedule?
Got some stuff in the summer. I do. I have diversified as I've gotten older. I spent many years only riding my bike. I do like to do ultra marathons on foot now, so I have a couple of ultra races, some big mountain trail running events coming up in the summer. I do have a 24-hour mountain bike race I'm going to be doing at the end of the summer in August. Let's see, what else? Probably some cyclocross moving into the fall. But yeah, good number of events peppered through. Couple of big kind of Grand Fondo type gravel rides that I'll be doing in Montana here. So yeah, enough to keep me motivated. Everything starts a little later. We're just kind of digging ourselves out of the snow. So everything gets shifted a few months forward. But I'm looking forward to it. It's gonna be good. I like to I like to keep a few really hard things on the calendar just to make sure I keep myself in check.
Nice. So on the endurance running, have you started to dabble with running power meters at all?
Yeah, I have. I work really closely with Stride actually. So Stride is the running power meter, one of them. So I've been running with power for a good while, and then I also I do coach ultra distance runners, and so all of them. So I work with running power on a daily basis with athletes doing, things like 100-mile mountain runs. So it's really interesting um, to apply power to trail running. So it's a pretty easy conversion if you were just say a marathoner on the road, but yeah, it's a little more nuanced off road, and when you're running for 24 hours. So coming up with figuring out how to apply power-based training to that, and really the same thing for cyclists. I mean, I also specialize in coaching ultra endurance cyclists, and so again, coming up with power strategies for mountain bikers that are riding their bike for 30 hours is a much different undertaking than maybe just a more traditional crit or road race. So everything gets a little more nuanced when you stretch the time period out and you throw out a bunch of terrain. But yeah, no, running power is just as powerful a tool as it is on the bike. It's really made things much different, and made athletes much more successful.
Very cool. I think we'll have to work up an episode where we talk about that in more detail. I think we'd have plenty of people who'd be interested in learning more about that. So we'll make a mental note and we'll talk offline about that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I will say too. You talked about sweet spot training, but I'll further that because I do. To your point, I think it's probably the biggest bang for your buck. But I always tell folks, the time and kind of time management, or the availability of time, is really the biggest enemy for most cyclists, right? Because riding takes a certain amount of time, and so if you can only work on one thing, just work on building your FTP, right? So I mentioned kind of getting pulled in different directions by different types of workouts and different things that seem exciting or whatever, and that's all well and good. But yeah, if you don't know what to focus on and you don't have a lot of time, just have a higher threshold. And really, it doesn't matter even the level of cyclist you are. I mean, if you increase your FTP, you probably won't win a crit or a road race, but you won't be in last. You won't get dropped. And so, I mean, there's really value in if you just can't do anything else or you don't have time. Yeah, sweet spot and FTP intervals are the way to go, and just hone in on that and drill down and make your FTP as strong as you can. And, you'll be really in a much better position than a lot of folks that, maybe try to diversify too much. So anyway, just to
That's a great point.
Reiterate your point about sweet spot and FTP focus being important. It's really the biggest bang for your buck, and you can do it, like you said, you can do it day in and day out. Typically, those efforts are at or below threshold, and those with a proper warm up and cool down, those don't tend to take too much away from you, and you can repeat them a few times a week.
Yeah, so actually we had a conversation along these same lines with Nate Dunn, data-driven athlete, last week, where we were talking about power profiling, what kind of a cyclist you are. And at the end of the day, one of the things we said was, look, exactly to your point, raise your threshold, because, and the analogy he used was a rising tide raises all ships. And so when you have a higher threshold, that means two things. That means, let's say on a crit race, you don't go as deep during the surges because your threshold's higher, so you're not going as high over threshold. And when they're not surging, you dip lower below your threshold, and therefore you recharge faster. And so what that allows you to do is be better primed for the sprint at the end. So if you already have a natural sprinting ability, maybe all you need is to raise your threshold so you can hang on to the pack and be in position and recharge at the right time to make that winning move at the end.
Right.
That's exactly what your threshold does.
Yeah, and there's a great, there's great tools. We've talked about WKO4 on here before, but WKO4 has a really great tool that it supplies each rider with what they call a phenotype. and the phenotype basically takes your power profile and classifies you as a type of rider. So it can be an all-arounder, it can be a TT, or it can be a sprinter. Um, and what you can do is you can use that phenotype to classify yourself. And like you said, Justin, you can say, okay, well, it's saying that, I'm already well suited to be a sprinter. So maybe I don't need to focus on, raising my VO2 max or doing anaerobic capacity intervals. Maybe I just need to bump up my threshold, and I'll be pretty well rounded, and my power profile will be pretty diverse. And so, you might you can use tools like that to figure out what's the highest and best use of your time. And and oftentimes it's not doing 30-second intervals, like everybody thinks, you need to do extreme high intensity intervals. But if you're already well suited from a musculature standpoint, so if you have a high percentage of fast twitch fiber, maybe you just pepper in a few of those from time to time to keep things primed, and you raise your FTP and you're set. So there's a lot of different ways to approach it, and you can do all of that because of a power meter. That supplies that fuels the kind of data side of things and pumps out the information that you need.
Absolutely. Taylor, we are out of time today. I appreciate you coming on the show. Your insights are always great, and we really appreciate you coming and spend part of your day with us. I just want to remind everyone that if you like the content, please give us a like, give us a follow. We got lots of great video content on here daily. We've got, there's a challenge going on right now. The What's on Zwift Coaches Challenge. They've got 6 days of different structured workouts on Zwift. We've got people streaming those workouts throughout the week. We also have every week on Wednesday afternoon in Pacific time, or Wednesday evening on the East Coast, we've got the Castelli Skills and Drills ride. It's streamed on here, and you can join in Zwift, where Ian Murray will teach you all about the different strategies and techniques that you would employ in road racing. So that's a great event to show up to and hone your skills. We want to thank Training Peaks for their great support of the show. And if you're wanting to use Training Peaks, you can go ahead and use the code ODZ20, so ODZ20, and get yourself 20% off Training Peaks premium services. So we really appreciate their support. So any closing thoughts, Taylor?
Yeah, get out there and get to work. Use your power meter. Go train.
You heard him. Get to work, boys. All right. Have a great day, everyone.